Hi, everyone. I'm Caroline Sinders. Thank you so much for coming to this talk and workshop. I'm really excited to be here. I'm one of the co-founders of Convocation Research and Design. We're a research, security, design, policy, and advocacy organization. We do a lot of different kinds of work. A lot of the work we've been focusing on recently has been security trainings, including security assessments for human rights organizations, code audits, rapid response for human rights defenders who are facing doxing attempts, state-level intervention. So that will be things like governments or government-sponsored adversaries attempting to place different kinds of malware on human rights activist computers. We also do work that looks at how to improve and strengthen the security in different kinds of software that folks are using. We also look at different kinds of digital harms that manifest inside of very large online platforms, including technology-facilitated violence and online gender-based violence. And we also look at the role of design in software and hardware, so how design can be a miscommunicator and a mistranslator of what software is doing. We think of design as a facilitator and a communicator in terms of what products do or don't do. And so design can be truthful or design can lie in terms of how a product is functioning. So we believe that design is a core integral part of software and human rights because, again, design is everything. It's the chairs you're sitting on. It's like the devices you use. And so design has to be involved in conversations around policy and human rights if we're trying to create safer forms of technology. Recently, my lab has worked on a few different projects. You can see some up here. We've worked with different think tanks and regulators across the EU on harmful design patterns, often referred to as dark patterns or deceptive design patterns. We recently partnered with 2 collective rights management organizations. Those are groups of lawyers that represent the copyright and interests of artists. So we partnered with DAX and Pixels, both in the UK, to respond to the UK government's inquiry on copyright and generative AI. We released a paper that focused on how to protect and strengthen artists' copyright and agency in the age of generative AI, while also proposing different methods that we think could strengthen innovation, again, while centering the safety of artists. And this is how today is going to go. Hopefully, I stick to the schedule. So what is the connection between AI data and human rights? So human rights are what we think of as basic and I would argue inalienable rights. We all have them, or we should have them, that belong to every person. We think a lot about, at Convocation, the freedom of speech, that privacy is a human right, even if it's not necessarily explicitly mentioned in a human rights law. Freedom of media expression, freedom of personal expression, freedom to gather, freedom to speak out against also different kinds of governments, and the ability to also have the autonomy to do that, which I believe is closely linked to privacy. Technology is very included in that, especially if we look at how we exist now online. Technology is a form of expression, of media expression, of sharing different ideas. And so technology can limit and also extend these freedoms. Technology can be very guilty of curbing human rights. And then within that is surveillance. So the monitoring of people's activities and communications or behaviors, particularly because so many different things now can be surveillance when we live in the age of surveillance capitalism with so much data being caught and captured and sold and resold, when most of this is data we are creating as individuals. It's data about ourselves, about our habits. It can be data used to pinpoint our locations. And so when technology is used for surveillance, it threatens the human right of privacy, the freedom of expression, and also the right to organize. It's used a lot to track the movements of activists and journalists in marginalized communities. It's used directly to, at times, often even jail these individual groups. And so a lot of what we also think about at Convocation is the role of surveillance in everyday life. So I'm going to give a few examples, again, from a human rights context, of how AI is used to explicitly harm. And the first section of this is focusing on artificial intelligence-assisted surveillance. So what is it? Why does it matter? And what does it do? Surveillance, again, is the monitoring of behavior, many activities, or information for the purpose of information gathering, influencing, managing, or directing. There are a few different types of surveillance. There's non-state surveillance, which is, I sort of think of it as consumer surveillance. So how many of you have heard of like a Ring camera? Yeah. That's like a little device you can buy to put on your front door that also acts as a doorbell. But anytime there's movement in front of your door, it starts recording, and you can have access to it as a live feed. In different cities, particularly in the US, consumers can opt in to allow different police departments to have direct access to their Ring feeds. So that all means as a person existing in the world, you could walk in front of a Ring camera and not realize that your local police department could be watching you in real time. Baby monitors, also a form of surveillance. I have a baby monitor because I have a baby, and I'm very conflicted about this. But also it's nice to be able to see what my baby is doing when he is yelling sometimes. But there's all different kinds of surveillance out there. And one of the reasons I'm sort of showing this is I want us to think about this definition, because this will come into play when we get into the workshop later. But sort of at its core, this almost sounds really benign, the monitoring of behavior, many activities, or information, right? So that alone could sound like just data collection. I'm also an artist. I work a lot with data and AI. So I want us to think about both how this benign definition can get used and misused, and then what is the context of when this monitoring is placed in society. But again, just to emphasize, surveillance is everywhere, and again, it's the ways in which the state and consumers utilize surveillance will impact our safety and our digital rights. And surveillance happens in both hardware and software, often both those mixed together. So fun little image. This is representing computer vision inside of different surveillance feeds. So trying to identify protesters in a crowd, for example. This is from an Amnesty International report on state-sponsored surveillance. And state-sponsored surveillance also refers to police departments, not just governments. It refers to city councils as well. But again, when we're saying state, we're thinking all things related to a country, a municipality, a region, and a city. I think this might be probably known to a lot of y'all, but I'm just going to run through it anyway so we're all on the same page. But surveillance, again, is often used to target activists and journalists, and there's many different types of surveillance within that. So facial recognition and biometric tracking are different examples of surveillance that can be deployed by authoritarian regimes and private security firms. So as we saw in the previous slide, that's an example of a computer vision system attempting to use facial recognition to identify who's in the crowd. Facial recognition is also used in consumer products. If you've ever tried to unlock your phone with your face, right, that's a form of facial recognition. Or if you've ever used really funny, what are they called, like things on Instagram to like add dog ears to yourself, that's also using facial recognition because it's trying to recognize if there's a face. But facial recognition is very readily deployed. It's deployed also widely across Europe. But other forms of surveillance also include predictive policing algorithms, which again can also use things like facial recognition to flag or identify protesters. But predictive policing algorithms will also look at patterns in people's social media, try to scrape for things like location data, and using that to create a likelihood, let's say, of someone arresting or rearresting. We've seen this used in the US specifically in court cases, and a lot of predictive policing algorithms will disproportionately flag historically marginalized communities, particularly predominantly Black communities, as more likely to offend and give them higher sentences, even for first-time offenders, while flagging repeat white offenders as less likely to offend. So these predictive policing algorithms, at first glance, might not seem like a form of surveillance, but it's pulling from a lot of what we could argue is like localized or personal data, and also pulling from historical biased records of policing, since police, especially in the US, tend to over-police historically Black neighborhoods and marginalized neighborhoods. But there's other forms of surveillance, for example, when different kinds of state actors or different kinds of, let's say, harmful watchdog groups, I'm thinking of like Canary Mission, will engage in mass data scraping of social media to attempt to identify and dox activists and human rights defenders. OSINT refers to open source investigative tools. So that is being able to use things readily available to you. That includes social media. That also includes things like public records. So if you've purchased a house, for example, that's often publicly accessible information that anyone can request from a city, information about who purchased it, how much it costs, when, the name, etc. So there is also, and I'll also say that I use OSINT a lot in my own work, in my own human rights work. Being able to look at publicly available information is really key also in terms of doing human rights work. But this is one of the ways in which this kind of research that we're doing also technically would be a form of surveillance. I think what is important to talk about again is that context of the monitoring and data gathering. When we're using it to confront a harmful power structure, is it right to still call it surveillance? But again, I want us to sort of think about that. But OSINT, again, can be used for bad, and it can be used to directly harm any individual, including human rights defenders. We're going to go through a few different case studies. A lot of these are focusing on facial recognition, which is a good segue into our first example, facial recognition misuse. So Amnesty International started a Ban the Scan campaign, first focusing on New York City as ways to highlight facial recognition, how it can be disproportionately used to target different kinds of marginalized groups. But also facial recognition has, like a lot of computer vision systems, which was sort of discovered in a paper by Timnit Gebru and Joy Bellamy called Gender Shades. Computer vision models have a very difficult time recognizing different races. Does anyone want to guess what computer vision models, who they're best at identifying? If you're thinking white men, you are correct. Computer vision models are the best and most accurate at identifying white male faces. They have a harder time with facial features that start to look more feminized and with skin tones that are not white. These are the models that are behind facial recognition. So when facial recognition is deployed in a city, it has a very difficult time of accurately identifying most members of the public, since many members of the public are not white men, right? So aside from also being just a form of harmful surveillance, it's being deployed and it's continually sort of misidentifying people, and it's being used a lot, again, by law enforcement. So that's leading to a lot of false arrests of innocent people. This is why Amnesty started the Ban the Scan campaign. A few different cities in the US have started to ban facial recognition. The city I'm from, New Orleans, we originally banned facial recognition and then we sadly rolled it back. So that was a big bummer. But another example is Clearview AI. So how many people have heard of this company called Clearview AI? A few. Clearview AI is a company that created a facial recognition model and has a lot of data. It's unclear where they have all this data from. My assumption is they have illegally scraped a lot of data of different people's faces. And it will, from this sort of massive database they've created of people's faces, police departments can plug in their own data to Clearview AI and start to, in heavy quotes, more accurately identify folks. I will say that they are starting to actually accurately identify folks. How well Clearview AI works is really, really scary. But again, it's unclear where they've gotten millions of images of real people's faces. But this is being purchased and used by police departments across the world, including Europe. It was temporarily blocked in the UK for violating GDPR. But last time I checked, Clearview AI overturned that temporary ban. So it could be deployed even here. I'm not sure if it's in the Netherlands, but it is being used globally, not just in the US. And then we're also seeing the deployment, especially now, of software and products being made that are specifically designed to target protests, especially since the summer in 2020 of the Black Lives Matter protests. So we're starting to see massive purchasing of governments worldwide, including the US, the UK, and India, of buying specific facial recognition software to both monitor and identify activists to then suppress protest movements. And again, this disproportionately impacts marginalized communities. There are some tips for trying to avoid being identified at protests. I definitely recommend wearing a mask. That's not why I'm wearing one today, but it is helpful. Other things to, again, just very quickly, if you're going to a protest and you're worried about being identified, if you have any identifying marks like tattoos, cover them up. Think about covering your hair, wear a mask, anything that is like unique to you that could identify you. Again, tattoos are a big one. Try to cover those. It'll make it that much harder for even someone looking at a photograph to sort of say if you were there or not. And masks are super helpful within that. But AI is also readily used globally by many different militaries across the world. It's deployed in things like drones. It's also being used as a form of analysis and research, right, to process satellite images and mass amounts of satellite images to identify or potentially misidentify targets. It's also used to help detect or predict different cyber attacks. I will also say that AI used to analyze cybersecurity is also used in human rights. There's a really great project that is using machine learning to analyze patterns in China's firewall, for example, to understand how to find vulnerabilities within that to help folks be able to access internet outside of China. But it's also used here with these awful fucking robot dogs. Some of these are being deployed in different cities currently in the US as a form of autonomous policing, for example. But some of these robot dogs are also used for bomb disposal, which actually can be a little helpful. But we also see it, again, being used as autonomous weapons or lethal autonomous weapon systems, laws for short. Awful acronym. But again, these are autonomous weapon systems that select and engage with targets and often result in killing without any human intervention, right? So these are used in armed drones. Obviously, this leads to so many questions. A big one is also thinking about who is responsible if an autonomous system kills the wrong person. This happens with a lot of frequency. Should machines be allowed to make life or death decisions, right, without human intervention, but just generally? Proliferation is a big worry. You know, once developed, these weapons then get widely adopted. This is something, if y'all have looked into like the nuclear arms race, right? Once one country has this kind of weapon, all other countries feel like they need to have it in case of a potential war, right? That your weapons need to match the weapons of your potential enemy, but also that your weapons should match the weapons of your collaborators. I think all these are equally big issues, but one is also escalation. These can go very fast. These can make quick decisions and be quickly deployed, right, without human intervention. And I think that obviously directly relates to all of these, just the quickness that an autonomous weapons system can make in terms of targeting. I feel like I don't need to say why this matters, but I like to have it up here anyway, just also for folks to take photos if it's helpful for you. I also really wish a lot of these awful companies would stop using Lord of the Rings names for their companies like Anduril and Palantir. But autonomous weapon systems and military AI very obviously threaten human rights and global security. Again, a lot of this also just comes down to decision making. Who's involved in these decisions? I think it becomes very easy for governments to claim a mistake and say it's not their fault, it's the AI made this decision, right? I think that makes it more difficult, especially in terms of human rights law and legality of trying to hold, again, governments accountable, because who is responsible? I would argue it's them. They purchased the system, they deployed it, they signed off on its deployment. They're responsible for any of the fallout related to that. I'm not a lawyer, but I do know that this starts to get into tricky areas of who explicitly do you hold responsible? Like who will do the jail time for this? I'm just gonna read what this guy, whose name is Lucky Palmer, and I actually think that is his real name, says. So he's the creator of an autonomous weapons company called Anduril. To be perfect, there will be people who are killed by AI who should not have been killed. That is a certainty if artificial intelligence becomes a core part of the way we fight wars. So he's just sort of blatantly admitting that mistakes will happen with these systems. And that's just a byproduct of the system, which is really dark. And again, part of my language, really fucked up. But a lot of these, again, like when we're thinking of AI impacting human rights, it's not just AI used, let's say, in the battlefield. And it's not just AI used in surveillance. Data is a large part of AI. Data is what I think sort of creates, let's say, like the flavor of how AI works, right? It's what models are trained on. Data is also widely used and misused by governments as ways to implicate or attack human rights defenders, activists, and journalists, and even the everyday public. And so just the amount of data that is sort of being gathered about us, just even socially, really plays into this. An example I like to give is, think about all of the posts you have on like TikTok or Instagram. It might be pictures of you and your friends. It might be things you're celebrating. That's not an accurate reflection of your whole life, though. So imagine in a court case between like two parents who are divorcing, if all the photos someone posted of every night they went out being shown to like misconstrue, let's say that they're an alcoholic. Those posts are not a reflection actually of who that person is, right? That might be 200 stories across 5 years, right? But it can be misconstrued and presented as evidence that doesn't accurately paint who that person is, not only as a person, but as a parent. That's one example. But we could think about that then being used by an adversarial court or an adversarial government in another context, right? If you're sharing something in support of a particular group that the state has decided is a harmful group, right? And we see this being directly used with pro-Palestinian activists in the US to have students' visas revoked and be deported back to their home countries. So we're seeing this already in real time, right? The use and misuse of the data we place in things even of like social networks. But data really can be anything, right? So data is just a piece of information that can be collected, stored, and analyzed. Birth dates are data. What you're allergic to is data. Your favorite food is a piece of data, right? These are data points about you. But it can be text, like messages, emails, text messages. It can be things like metadata, the time you sent something. It can be images and videos, clicks, scroll, how long you spend just looking at something. This is like sort of the basis of recommendation algorithms, what you click on, how long you linger on a piece of content, what you click onto next, right? Data can also be the network that you're in and your extended networks. Again, if we're thinking more social media focused and recommendation algorithms, it can be basic things like your IP address. So like your internet address where you're sort of logging in from. It can be your exact location like GPS. It can be the types of devices you're using. And then again, biometric input, so fingerprints, face scans, etc. And I'm sure you know this and not to freak you out, but every time we go online, we leave a little series of breadcrumbs or like a little slug trail. You know, if you guys seen snails and they're like on the ground, they leave this little trail. That's kind of what we leave whenever we go online somewhere. So if we're connected to the Wi-Fi here, right, this is a part of our digital breadcrumbs. Let's say maybe you're Google searching some of the stuff in this presentation, right, that's adding to these breadcrumbs. We call this data exhaust, right? These sort of things we're leaving behind and how they make a profile of you. As I was mentioning earlier, it's things like web browsing, sites you visited, what you've clicked, search queries, you know, what you've Googled, social media activities, like shares, posts, followers, location. So that's like all of us, again, logging onto this Wi-Fi, right? This is sort of triangulating maybe what you've done today. Whenever you use free accessible Wi-Fi, not that you shouldn't use it, but that is like creating this data trail. App usage, how long you use an app, the specific features. Purchases, what you buy, when and how often. But cookies are little things in your browser that are sort of tracking when you go to different websites. So that's why if you, let's say, looked up a pair of shoes and for a few days it like follows you as an ad, a lot of that is from cookie tracking. And then again, metadata, data about your data. So when a message was sent, not just its content. And what are these issues? Well, too much of this is being collected, and a lot of it is being sold, right? This is how Facebook makes a lot of money. It's not just selling advertising space to advertisers, it's also selling the data about you, right? It's like what they think your patterns are, what kinds of groups you'd fall into. So not just demographic groups, but, you know, oh, this person is really into this type of movie and this type of product. We can make a group name about that. And that's something that can be sold back to advertisers. But it's also related to when so much data is collected, how much of it is, you know, secured properly. How many of you have ever gotten a notification that your password was leaked? Or you've read about it? That's a great example of not secured properly data, right? And then again, also the selling or sharing of personal information. And again, this is what social media also does in terms of advertising. But then also this relates into an area, so what I was describing earlier, we could think of as surveillance capitalism, right? All this data sort of collected about us and sold without our consent. But this also plays into data colonialism, right? So then the harm of when this data is also extracted without consent from marginalized communities and then used to further harm them. So either engaging in digital redlining, so that's where certain groups are cut out of products being targeted to them because they're not considered the right group. Or a great example from Professor LaTonya Sweeney, who's a Harvard professor. When she Googled her name, one of the ads that popped up on Google was LaTonya Sweeney arrested, and then suggestions for bail bonds. And that's because she has a historically black sounding name. So we can think of this also as an example of digital redlining. She wasn't getting ads suggesting, do you want to buy toothpaste? It was things related to research if LaTonya Sweeney's been arrested, or do you need bail bonds? And bail bonds, for folks that don't know, are services in the US where if you've been arrested and don't have enough money to post bail to be released from prison while awaiting trial, you can go and purchase towards a bail bond that allows you to get out of prison. So again, playing on these very harmful, in heavy quotes, like stereotypes, right? Because it is a stereotype, but also even more harmful than a stereotype of what a digital system assumes someone with a US black sounding name would need. Any questions so far? No? If you, yes, there's one in the back and one there. The breadcrumbs? Yeah. It really differs like from different companies or different products. So yeah, think of breadcrumbs as like a metaphor. All Wi-Fi systems are just tracking who's accessing the Wi-Fi, right? And that's not necessarily being sold, but that's stuff that like law enforcement could put in a request to the Wi-Fi service provider, let's say, of this event, and get a list of all of the computer IP addresses, right? They'd have to evidence to a judge why they needed that, but that is being tracked, right? That's just like a manual form of tracking. VPNs work really well, a virtual private network. Mullvad and TunnelBear are great ones if you're looking for VPNs. So it will mask your IP address from the Wi-Fi provider. So all they'll see is that a VPN has connected. They won't see necessarily your IP address or what you've looked at. But like your internet provider can see like the different websites you visited unless you use encrypted browsers like Brave or Tor. So that will hide the content you're explicitly looking at. So if you go in Google incognito mode, your internet provider can still see what you're looking at. It's just not tracked as history in your Google browser, just as an FYI. You had a question?
Yeah, just shortly, I think we all know this myth, maybe a myth. We're talking about something with friends and
oh yeah, this one? Yeah.
Minutes later it pops up as an app.
Yeah.
Is that really like because our phones are listening to us at all times? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question. That is not because your phone is listening to you, but it does involve the Wi-Fi, right? So let's say I'm telling my friend Eric here about this really specific restaurant I want to go to that like Eric's never heard of. And then the next day he sees an ad for it on Instagram. It's not because his phone is like listening to us talking. It's because we already probably have a shared data network between ourselves. So Eric and I follow each other on Instagram. I've probably been Googling this restaurant, visiting their Instagram site, right? That can be used by different platforms to sort of see that we're actually like physically close to each other. So we probably have shared interests, right? So like from me just researching it and getting excited about this restaurant, and then the fact that I probably have very close digital ties to Eric, like we're in the same communities, we're probably looking at the same things, we're probably talking a lot to each other on Wi-Fi and on platforms to each other. That's how you get those recommendations, right? It's because there's this invisible map built, or like network built between the two of you. That's not just you both having to be Instagram friends. It's like you've been communicating a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of a follow-up, but that process seems like super complicated.
So it goes like much faster, right? Like it sounds like to us like that takes so much time to do. This is like a matter of seconds. But think about all of the ads you're probably exposed to every day. Like when you're on social media, you might be on a few different platforms. When you're reading the news on your phone, right? There's probably at least 10 different ads you could have on a news site, right? That maybe you're just not really paying attention to. And then all the ads you see on, let's say, Instagram. So as you're scrolling, there's so many promoted posts that don't look immediately like an ad that are technically an ad. Or if you're going through the stories, you'll see 2 stories, an ad, 3 more stories, 5 ads. Those ads just aren't registering to you as important information. The one that is registering to you is the one you just talked about. But you're seeing hundreds or even like thousands of ads a day, right? So it feels more accurate because that's the one that's sticking out to you, when in fact it's just trying to show you as many relevant things as possible and hoping that those are things that are interesting to you that you'll go and purchase or go and engage with. Again, these are just some more examples of different forms of data related to surveillance. We've talked about some of this before, but like data collection is a part of surveillance systems, right? So cameras just sort of constantly filming that have CCTV, like that video is a form of data, right? Being able to go back and access it. Or folks requesting data, like video streams from surveillance cameras to build better models. Again, like images of ourselves that people go on Instagram all the time and scrape it to improve facial recognition models, even though they shouldn't be doing that because it breaks GDPR. And then profiling and predictive analytics, right? So different AI companies analyzing online behavior from social media and browsing history to create these sort of detailed profiles about individuals. Facebook already kind of does this about us. They just sort of sell it as data back to advertising companies. And then one of the things we've noticed is even when data sets are anonymized afterwards, they can be de-anonymized. So if a lot of data is gathered about someone, even if you remove, let's say, like their face and the location or the exact location, you can still actually re-identify folks. It just depends upon like the amount of data and what aspects were anonymized and what weren't. But you can, again, re-identify people also by accessing other forms of data that's out there. And again, we're seeing obviously data being used in the rise of deepfakes in synthetic media, deepfakes made about famous people, but also being able to be generated from different kinds of generative AI. And then a lot of data leakage, so mentioning our passwords, but also a lot of chatbot systems that are being used in lieu of customer service, asking folks about purchase orders or information about themselves to verify their identity. It's not clear how well that chat stream is stored, right? Like it might not be stored as securely as, let's say, when you place a purchase, how your credit card information might be stored more securely. And then again, corporate and state use. So personal data being used for surveillance or profit. Just things to consider. AI thrives on data, and this sort of large-scale data collection is often violating not only privacy rights, but privacy law. That's why we have things like GDPR here in the EU, and the Digital Markets Act called the DMA, and the Digital Services Act, the DSA, and then the EU AI Act. I think we've covered a lot of these. I just want to get to some other stuff that's less depressing, how AI is used for good. We use it a lot in the human rights space for research, right? So some of the same ways that it's used for harm, we can also use these for good. So I've worked with Amnesty on a few different projects where we were using publicly available satellites. So let's say like satellite imagery we were pulling from weather satellites to help identify oil spills, for example, in Nigeria. At the time, the government wasn't being honest about the extent of a spill. So Amnesty worked with a few thousand volunteers to go through and just look at a bunch of different pieces of satellite imagery. This was a few years ago before computer vision models got much better at identifying different things within images, but Amnesty was able to evidence not only that the government was lying, but to show the extent of how harmful this oil spill was by working with volunteers to just help label or click through images. We're also seeing this used in natural language processing to help surface or identify hate speech. When this is used in human rights, there's often always a person verifying what the findings are. It's never done without human intervention. There's always a team of people working. But we also can use it for pattern detection in large data sets. This is especially great if you're helping to try to piece together corruption or police misconduct. Human Rights Watch, a really fantastic group, has been using AI satellite imagery similar to Amnesty to document different kinds of environmental destruction, but also war crimes, mass detentions, and providing visual evidence of human rights violations. AI is so helpful for human rights activists to be able to better document and verify and evidence when human rights atrocities are occurring. So one of the ones I'm a big fan of is V-Frame by the artist and human rights defender Adam Harvey. Adam works a lot with Mnemonic. They used to be called the Syrian Archive. But Adam made a computer vision tool called V-Frame. And so groups like Mnemonic and Witness are often scraping social media for folks on the ground who are documenting war crimes, right? To be able to sort of show that what a government might be saying is incorrect. And a lot of these images get taken down by platforms because they do technically violate the terms of service of a platform. They violate a lot of the policy because sometimes you're seeing, sadly, images of people that have been killed. But we need these images stored and archived somewhere because they're evidence of war crimes, right? And they're being placed online by folks who are on the ground who want to show what's happening. What Adam noticed was that after an explosion has gone off, there's debris left behind. So he spent like years building a computer vision system that can identify explosives from parts of debris, and you can trace where those explosives were purchased from or what countries they were made in. So an example is, let's say a country like Russia is saying, no, we're not deploying weapons in Syria. Well, if we can identify the debris of the explosives and we can show that it was made or originating from Russia, that creates a stronger tie to say, well, where did these come from, right? And you might be able to start placing which group set off the explosives. So I think this is an incredible project. It's not an open source project. Adam does a lot of open source work. He explicitly only wants human rights groups to have the ability to have this project. He does not want it used or misused by any kind of government. And again, we mentioned satellite imagery, so you can check out UNOSTAT, which is UNITAR's satellite imagery program if you're interested in sort of more uses of satellite imagery. One thing that's been used really recently, done by Bloomberg, a journalism publication in the United States, is they have made their own LLM tools. And what they've been doing is they have been scraping public information from speeches of Trump and Putin along with, text that the administration will put out, right? Like they'll put out a statement. So they gathered all of this text data and used an LLM to analyze similarities between their speeches, including sentiment analysis, the context of how certain word phrases were using. And what they've been able to do is to sort of show that Trump is actually really regurgitating a lot of Putin's speech and a lot of Putin's speaking points, which hopefully maybe can be used to evidence stronger covert ties to Russia by the current administration. Hopefully that has some impact, hard to say. But one of the things we've been thinking about convocation is, this was so amazing that Bloomberg was able to do this. They have a team of incredibly talented engineers. Is it possible to build a tool for smaller newsrooms where they can use an LLM as well, and they can bring their own data sets to it. So how could a tool be made, right, to really support smaller newsrooms in doing this kind of cutting-edge data journalism? Another example we love is from the group called Spawning. They created this database called Have I Been Trained? It's a way for artists to upload images or search their names in projects. And it's pulling from this massive data set called Lion. And you can go and click on your images and say, I don't want them in the data set anymore. So it creates this registry. And Hugging Face has a collaboration with Spawning where they constantly take new information from the Do Not Train registry and place that back into their data sets and models, meaning that if you decide today to remove some of your images, I think in a few weeks, Hugging Face will go and check the registry and then match that to those images and remove them. So not totally human rights, but I think related to human rights, like creativity and freedom of expression and how your images are used, I would argue is a form of human rights and freedom of expression. But I thought this was really cool. If you were thinking about, like, I want to make tools using AI for human rights, because I know a lot of us are designers, what would be some things to think about? So this is something that we sometimes assist in tool building. It should be compliant with regulation. So the GDPR, the DMA, the DSA, the EU AI Act, there does need to be transparency and meaningful transparency and consent in these tools. So knowing what's in the data set, has someone actually checked and ensured that the data set you're using to help generate a model doesn't have different kinds of harms within it. A big harm is that a lot of the earlier Lion data sets had what is called CSAM, or child sexual exploitative imagery. That's child pornography in them. And it's because those data sets are so massive. No one did the due diligence on that. This really matters because CSAM is one of the few things that nearly globally there are laws restricting around the usage of it. So that should not be in your data set. So like a human rights group would want to know, have you checked what's in the data set? Can you explain like what's in here to us? Where did the data come from? Was it like consensually gathered? Was it like legally gathered? Is it compliant? Like, can we get into any kind of trouble if we're using your tool? These are things that you should be able to talk about. And then agency, those that have contributed to the data set can remove or add content as they see fit. So a human rights group doesn't want to use a tool and then have someone email them and be like, the tool wouldn't let me remove my stuff. That would not be good. Some of this is also thinking like, not a lot of human rights groups have technologists on staff. Same with a lot of journalist groups. So an interface that non-programmers can use. A lot of organizations are dealing with heavily sensitive information. So if we think of VFrame, for example, when Adam Harvey's working with Mnemonic, they're sometimes now actually getting data directly from human rights defenders in Syria. Those images need to be protected. There's metadata in those images that could point back to who took those images and endanger that human rights defender. There's metadata, and a lot of metadata is needed in the images to help verify where the image was, that it wasn't doctored, right? But metadata from those images can also point back directly to the exact phone. So that's why it has to be protected. So if a human rights group is using a tool, they need to make sure that your tool is not taking their data back into the model. Everything has to be local, right? So thinking about data as this incredibly precious and private object that like lives are at stake, you have to think about data with that much seriousness. It can be open source. Not all organizations require that, but some folks really like that. So if they want to, they can check the code themselves. Again, has to be secure. So sometimes we recommend local to the user's machine only, right? So if the tool needs any data, like if I have to use your tool, all the data that I'm inputting stays on my machine, right? Compliant and easy to delete. So if I'm worried that my device is going to be seized by law enforcement, I need to remove everything from that software immediately or very easily delete the software and leave no trace. And also the ability to use small data sets, right? Folks might not have thousands of images, they might have only a few. So I think one of the things that's interesting about AI is we're entering the age of small data sets, that we've reached a point with model development that we don't need thousands and thousands and thousands of images. We don't need something the size of Lion anymore. I think that's actually really great for human rights because it means that some of the few hundred images we have can now actually be useful and used in different kinds of investigations. Some general best practices. I can talk about these more afterwards if folks want to. What time is it? 5 minutes? Okay. I wanted to get to a workshop, but I can tell you about the workshop afterwards if you want. One of my students has already done it, so she can tell you if she liked it or not. I hope you did. And then, again, these are just some more best practices to think about. All right, thank you.